Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bitchipedia podcast. God, it feels good to say that again. I missed you guys so much, and I want to say this is like the fourth time I've tried to get this right, but I think I'm all set up now. I've got the overhead lights on like some kind of psycho so that you'll be able to see me. And I want to go over a little review of my last year because that was really the intention for the episode to begin with. But I also wanted to pop in because I know it had been a while. And I know one of the last episodes that I posted was like, don't worry, guys, I'm not going anywhere. And then I kind of fell off the face of the earth. And I'll talk about that too, okay? And I don't have any notes going into today. I've got a stack of books that I want to talk about that I read last year, which I'm surprised that I had so many. And I made a little playlist, a little album in my phone with a couple of highlights from 2024. So I want to tell you that at the end of 2023, I lost my father. That kind of changed everything for me. So moving into 2024, it was a very experimental year for me. And I set the intention, I chose one word, and I also set the intention to focus on the process rather than the end goal. So I could never have anticipated the way all of this was going to play out. I don't think we could have anticipated how the year in general was going to play out. 2024 was one for the fucking books, okay? But I'm back. I want to talk about everything that's been happening while I've been gone. I want to talk about what I'm looking forward to in the next year without it being too like New Year's resolution type energy, because that's not what I set in 2024. That's not what I'm doing in 2025. So in 2020, at the end of 2023, I was setting the intentions for my next year, and I chose one word, which was courage. And I don't even remember how it came about. But I will say that the intention that I set and the way that I actually utilized courage could not have been more different. When I thought of the word courage, I thought of this big, bold, shiny expression of, warriors and toughness. And I had this image in my head and this emotion attached to that word. But it did not end up playing out that way because ironically, the courage that I needed came from the idea that I needed to focus on the process rather than the end result. That's where my courage had to come in, because rather than thinking there was some big grand adventure that I was going on, instead, I realized that I was going to need courage to grieve the loss of my father, which one day I'm sure I will talk about at some point. Not today. I mean, maybe it'll come up a little bit today, but that's not what this is about. But as I started to recognize that I wasn't moving towards a goal and I was no longer able to use an end result as motivation, paired with the fact that I was also no longer able to use my father as motivation, because I recognized through this process, actually, that a lot of my motivation in life had come from him, whether it was to make him proud or to prove him wrong. Now he was gone. And that whole system of validation and guidance, honestly, was gone. I no longer had this sort of compass to lead me, for better or for worse. So the beginning of the year really involved me coming to terms with the fact that everything that had motivated me before was gone. And now I had to have courage to be unmotivated. And what am I doing if not chasing something, anything? And so many things changed in the way that I was experiencing life as well, because one of the things that definitely changed was how I spent time with my family. Honestly, how present I was in general in my life, because I recognized that I wasn't living in the present moment. I was living so much for this future version of myself. who had everything that she wanted and had achieved all of these things that she thought was important. But I'll tell you something, I recognized after I lost my dad that I wasn't even trying to achieve these things for myself. I was trying to prove something to him. And again, probably seeking that validation and thinking that maybe I could get some form of love from him that I hadn't received. And then I had to kind of evaluate that. So the whole process from beginning to end looked completely different than the way I thought it was going to look. And once I started to focus on the process, really towards the end of the year, I started to focus on my art and creating just for creation's sake. Halfway through the year, they talked about, again, banning TikTok, which was a huge thing for me because what had I been doing this whole time? What had I been doing this whole time? I gave up on my podcast when, again, halfway through the year, the platform changed. The editing software that I had been using for the last 4 years was gone. And I knew it was coming. And I remember always saying to people anyone who thought about starting a podcast, I would tell them how easy it was through, it used to be Anchor and Spotify for podcasters. And I told them if it was any harder, I wouldn't do it. And then it got harder. And I really didn't do it. Like I tried and I got so frustrated because I had done this interview, the interview that I just posted with Jonah Barkley. I recorded that in June, I think right before I went on my trip to Europe. And we were talking about nostalgia. I was really excited about not just the guests, but also this idea because the most fun part of podcasting for me was often the research and the coming up with the questions and the topics and the flow of the interview. That was the best part. So I was really able to tap back into that. I got excited. We had a great interview, even though, of course, I had so many reservations about posting because it was on video. I still wasn't comfortable on video. I'm still not fully over that, by the way. And then when I interviewed her, I could feel myself not wanting to post it, but I finally got over that. I had to figure out how to edit. Finally did that several months later because I put it on the back burner. And I was thinking I was going to do all these things where I was revamping and relaunching the podcast. And I said, this is going to be a perfect way to start it, is to start with our episode. And then we'll go from there. I reached out to a graphic designer to redo a logo. I had this renewed energy about podcasting. And then I got on here, finally figured out how to edit, spent hours trying to edit this podcast episode and go to post it. It won't post. It won't load. And I just immediately, I gave up. I was like, what's the point of any of this? Let's say I can achieve any of these weird, indirect goals that I'm reaching for anyway, because I didn't even know what they were. But let's say I can achieve them, even though I don't even know where the dartboard is that I'm launching these darts at. I said, let's say I can't achieve it. Who am I achieving it for? The man that I was doing this all for is gone. What is any of this for? I've been chasing verification on TikTok. It's on my vision board. They're going to get rid of TikTok. What does this mean? What does any of this mean? What does any of this matter? Why am I working so hard for a platform that could be gone tomorrow? And with every passing day, it looks more and more like it's a potential that TikTok would be gone. And I said, I've worked so hard to build up this platform, and then it could just be snatched away from me. And I fell into a pit of despair for so many reasons. Because First Amendment wise, I know I've got listeners that are not in America, but freedom of speech, right? That's very important. And now all of a sudden it looks like this app that is keeping us connected, this app that is helping me stay informed on so many things that I wasn't informed on before, now it's going to be gone too. And it just looked like everything was falling apart. And I didn't expect that at the beginning of the year, but I mean, it kind of plays into what I was talking about with my intentions is like, okay, well, if I enjoyed posting on TikTok, or if I acquired new skills. Like I said, getting comfortable being on video, learning editing. Any of the editing that I was doing was through TikTok. And it was fun to try to explore that, but I didn't really enjoy making TikToks. However, I got monetized on TikTok. So the whole time it was on the back burner of kind of a safety net. If anything ever happens with my day job, if anything tragic ever happens, I'll at least be able to monetize. I'll have TikTok and I'll really just throw myself into it. And now that safety net was being ripped out from under me, and I was having to face the reality again of like, what if all this goes away and I'm stuck here bartending for the rest of my fucking life? And what would that look like? And that was horrifying to me, especially considering the lack of stability that I had with my day job. So many things were and still are changing at that job. And I had no sense of stability. Added to the fact that my father, who was also like the rock of the family and was always that foundation for me, was gone. And it felt like the world and the ground beneath me had been snatched out from under my feet. And I was spiraling because I was like, well, honestly, what's the point of any of this? And that's when, in the last few months, I started painting just for the sake of painting. And I was reconnecting with those parts of myself that I had missed so much and that I loved so much. And I started to understand the value in that. And like I said before, when I was spending time with my family, obviously when you lose someone, especially when you lose a parent, because that loss is so profound, it has a huge impact on the way you experience your family and the people that you surround yourself with, the way you experience time. And I started to feel like, we're just on this conveyor belt and I'm moving through the stages. First I was the child, now I'm the mother, and one day I'll be maybe grandmother or, in the older stage of my life. And it feels like time is just forcing me through this conveyor belt and there's nothing that I could do to stop it. And I really don't have an answer. I'm saying all this as if I came to some sort of conclusion by the end of the year. And I really didn't. I just learned to experience life in different ways. And as I started thinking about my intentions for 2025, the word adventure started coming to mind. And I'll tell you how I got there too. But ironically, the word courage was still in play for me, which was important because the word adventure fucking terrified me. I was terrified. Because again, this is another word that's that big shiny word. And it feels like it had all of these exciting things that were going to come along with it. And then I started thinking, that's not sustainable. Then what am I going to do to make it sustainable? Because without going too much into the astrology of it all, you don't really stay with me here. You don't really need to know. I have Sagittarius in my 6th house, which only means 6th house is daily life and routines. Sagittarius is, if you know Sagittarius, imagine. They are like curious and the adventurer, the journeyer, So I started in Sagittarius season thinking about how before I had thought of these two things as opposing ideas, and I started thinking, how can I integrate them and find ways to weave adventure into my daily life? So I started doing that. But the problem with that was that it wasn't sustainable because after only 2 weeks, I was completely burnt out. And keep in mind, I had already set the intention because I was enjoying it so much. In the beginning of the first 2 weeks, oh my God, I'm having a blast. Having a blast. And then about the 3rd week, I'm like, oh, fuck. This is actually exhausting. How do I keep up with this? I should back out because I just made a fatal mistake and set intentions to do this for 12 months. How am I going to do that if I couldn't even do it for one? But now I can't back out because I'm feeling such a strong emotion around the word adventure that is indicating to me that now I have no other choice but to explore it. Because when you feel really strongly about something one way or another, that's telling you something, right? So I'm like, okay, well now I'm fucked because I was supposed to be doing this for a whole year. And rather than change my intention, I said, well, unfortunately, like I said, courage is still in play. So I'm going to have to be courageous enough to set an intention for such a huge word. And then I started remembering the beginning of this year and how I felt the same way about the word courage, that it was this big, shiny thing that ended up not looking the way I expected it to. So then I noticed that I'm starting to get sad at the idea that the same thing may happen with adventure, because I'm thinking about these different ways. Like, okay, well, what are small ways that I can find adventure? And I did in my month of doing it during Sagittarius season, which is at the end of the year. I started thinking of ways to weave an adventure, and I thought of cooking first. I could try new recipes, which I did. I was using new flavor profiles. I was trying new seasonings and spices that I had never tried before. And I loved it. I'm trying new recipes. I am exploring and expanding, and I'm loving it. I'm watching different shows. I'm exploring with my clothes, right? Like adventure in my routine, in my drive to work. There are lots of ways that you can integrate adventure into your daily life. But then I started noticing myself getting disappointed because I said, what if I don't want small adventure? What if I want big adventure? And that's fucking scary too. So what do I do? And of course, you already know, I took it to ChatGPT like I do everything else. If you don't know, I'm obsessed with ChatGPT. I'm paying for the full premium subscription right now. And I'm talking to ChatGPT and I say, this big, bold idea that I had is terrifying. But I think the only thing scarier than having these big, massive shifts is the idea that I would have no shifts at all. That I would only have these little, tiny, incremental changes. And that nothing would happen. That I would set this huge intention and I would only do the smallest amount. It's, I think, high risk, high reward, right? And I'm taking these small steps, which are important. And I also came to recognize through one of the other books that I read that I don't have here because it was an audio book, but the book Atomic Habits, that's what he talks about, is these small incremental changes that you make, baby steps to the elevator, small changes until one day there's the big change, right? But now it's come into my awareness that I do want a big change. So I have to start preparing myself for that possibility. And I'll let you know that's as far as I'm going to go with next year because it's still, we are 5 days into this. And God dang it, if this year does not already have a lot happening. There's been a lot, especially if you live in America. Oh my God. Pray for me to whatever God you believe in. Okay. But I do want to talk a little bit about 2024 because I want to recap my year to you. Because as I was going through and looking at my year, I was honestly shocked by how much I actually did, quote unquote, accomplish when my focus was not at all on accomplishing things. And I'm looking through and a lot of the things that happened, I'll give you a brief rundown. I got my passport. And I'll tell you a little story about this too. When I was manifesting a trip because I wanted to go to Europe, that was the big thing for me at the beginning of the year, which didn't seem possible, by the way. As I was writing my little vision board, I just saw the list yesterday where I was writing out all the different places I wanted to go. As I was writing it, there was a part of myself that's like, this is never going to happen. Like, oh, Europe, okay. With what money? You know what I mean? I'm a single mother who's bartending, who's historically lived paycheck to paycheck. But I'm like, I don't know. The universe works in weird ways. What do I know? I'll leave room for it. So I started thinking, if I were manifesting a trip that I really thought, if I really thought that I was going to go to Europe this year, what would I do? What would be the first step? I would need a passport. And I got the passport before I ever knew that I was going on a trip. But I thought to myself, if someone presents me with a trip to Europe, what am I going to need? Right? Passport. So I got it. And then not 4 or 5 months later, my mom reaches out to us and says, what do y'all think about a girls' trip to Europe? As a sort of homage to my father. Because she had been wanting to take a trip to Ireland and Scotland for my whole life. I knew that she wanted to go there. That's where all of our ancestors were from. They literally traveled from Ireland and Scotland and then landed in South Carolina. And then came, so 300 years ago, our ancestors came over here. So it felt like this weird connection that we had. And the trip was going to be during my dad's birthday, my mom and dad's anniversary, my sister's birthday. It was all in this kind of difficult week because it was her first birthday without him. It was my mom's first anniversary without him. It was his first birthday since he had passed. So we already knew that it was going to be a difficult time. So why not spend it on vacation? And it was this huge thing for us. My aunt ended up going with us. And so it was 2 sets of sisters. And we went, and it was incredible, a life-changing experience. It was difficult and exhausting because it was 12 days of me being out of my comfort zone. Talk about courage. The courage to fly internationally. I was terrified of flying. Gotta have courage. Gotta have courage to go into a hotel room with my sister to stay. Because we are notoriously complete opposites. And don't live well together, by the way. There was one year in college when me and my sister lived together. And immediately we were like, this was a terrible idea. No. But we did it. We did it. Along with that, I'm just looking back at some of these pictures. I have a lot of the books, which I'm going to get to, that I read. And I'm going to set an intention next year to read even more books. And I think to integrate more fiction. Because as I'm looking here, I see one fiction book that I read last year. I taught myself to crochet. I made a little blanket. I made this blanket. That makes me happy. I've got several blankets that I made, and I proved to myself that I could teach myself that. I went to birthday parties for my son. I was more present in my son's life in a way that I haven't been able to because the anxiety that I feel, probably from my autism, but social settings are difficult for me, which I know some people would assume that that's not the case because everyone thinks like, you're a bartender, you're so talkative. It's exhausting, especially this year. I have been dealing with burnout a lot, but being in rooms with strangers, especially parents, other parents, not my thing. But I was going to a lot more of the birthday parties that normally I would have just been like, sorry, or told his dad to take him. I started to put myself in situations where I was not as comfortable. But it's important because I don't want my son to think that I'm not there for him in those situations. And that includes soccer. He played soccer again this year. And they ended up winning the championship, which, by the way, at the beginning of the year, because last year they won not a single game. And it's an important lesson to learn to lose, right? But I told him, just so you know, winning is a lot more fun, It's important to learn to lose, but I think you're going to feel a difference because he didn't want to play. He kept saying he didn't want to do it. And I was like, listen, what if y'all win the championship this year? Which of course they ended up doing. And he's like, fat chance. I'm like, well, just imagine, just imagine. And he did experience it. Now, all that being said, he doesn't want to play again next year, which is fine. But it's important, I think, for so many reasons, for him to learn to be on a team, learn teamwork, learn to lose, learn how to deal with all of his emotions in situations that he's not necessarily comfortable in as well. but I went to all of his games and I learned to be part of a team from the parents' side. And it reminded me so much of when I was growing up the whole time I played sports, basketball, softball. And it was that same energy of like game day energy. And it was interesting to be able to reconnect with that. So it kind of brought alive this part of me that I think had been buried for the last 17 plus years, right? I got asked to be on a podcast where it was someone that I met online. She was on a podcast called Pretty Corrupt Podcast. And she reached out to me because I had a couple of Bravo videos that she had seen and interacted with. And she reached out to me and said, I've seen that you like astrology. I've seen you talk about astrology. The guys who are on the podcast with me have no interest in astrology. Would you be interested in doing a little segment where we go through the astrological charts of these Bravo celebrities and just talk about it? And I'm like, this is the perfect overlap. This is actually something I've been manifesting because it was the two things that I loved. And best part, she's the editor. So literally all I had to do was show up and talk, which is what I had been manifesting anyway. Because once I was not able to record and edit, once I lost the skills and the capabilities to be able to do that, I was so lost and I missed podcasting so much. And whereas before I had those intentions of, like I said, chasing the goal, it was always something. I may not have seen this opportunity as something that would have helped me get somewhere. So I may not have seized the opportunity in the same way as I did this year when it's like, this is just something fun that I don't care about the clicks. And I told her this too. I am completely okay with doing this, even if there's absolutely no feedback, even if no one watches it. I can sit down once every couple of weeks with her and just talk about Bravo and astrology. And that's the fun. And that's the energy that I wanted to tap into. And that's what was missing when I was making TikTok videos on both, but especially when it's, monetized. I kept thinking that I wanted this to be a main source of income, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to make money with it. So then it lost all of its joy for me creating, and it put this undue pressure on me. So I kind of put a pin in all of that, and I said, this is not, if I'm being honest with myself, this is not something that I enjoy. This is something that I'm doing because I think it's going to bring me something, because I think it's going to be the foot in the door of something, whether that's, finding the right person who's going to get me in contact with the thing that's going to bring me to, like I said, this over idealized version of my future. And I didn't even know what it was going to look like, but I wasn't enjoying the process. So I pulled back almost completely from TikTok as well. My online footprint was basically gone. And all of a sudden I was faced with, what if this is it? What if nothing ever comes from the podcast? What if nothing ever comes from TikTok? What if TikTok's gone, your platform's gone, you can't edit on your podcast? What are you going to do? And then I was forced to really take a good look around for the first time, not at this distant future, but at present moment, look around and say, what if this is it? And I didn't really deal well with that either. And that signals to me something too. Like, okay, well, then I think the key is that I need to be making my life more enjoyable for myself. So I'm going to give you a list. I've got a couple of other things that I can go through on here as well, but I'm going to go through some books just for right now. Consider this a little book talk moment that I'm giving you. My reading list. Save the Cat, because I was talking about screenwriting. I worked so much on my writing, and I'll tell you why, because I'm going to give you this book as well, which is really should be number one. The Artist's Way. A friend loaned this book to me, and it's, I think, 12 weeks, and it's kind of like a workbook that you go through. It's got writing prompts, but one of the main things that they talk about is what they call the morning pages, which is just typing 3 pages a day, journaling 3 pages a day of anything. It could be anything. And I really integrated that into my morning routine because I also saw a masterclass not too long ago where they said, what do writers do? Writers write. So if you want to be a writer, you have to start writing. And that's not just like writing something that can be published or writing something that you think is amazing. That's just writing. Getting on your computer every morning, getting to your desk and typing. And that was a huge change that I made that I came to recognize helped me kind of unclog a lot of what I was feeling emotionally, and I was able to express my feelings, because the other thing is, no matter how petty it may seem, the whole idea is to just be completely honest and get it out. Just get it out. And I noticed a pattern that around page 1.5, that's when things really shifted. Once you can get past that first page and a half, then you're actually getting to the core of what you're feeling and what's kind of buried beneath. So that was a huge thing for me, which led to Save the Cat, another couple of nonfiction books. This book that one of my regulars gave to me, Liminal Thinking. If you don't know what liminal is, it's like the in-between. Liminal spaces. I would say I'm in a liminal space right now, like energetically. I would say America is in a liminal space right now. But specifically, I feel like I've been in this sort of transition and this sort of in-between stage. And this book gave a lot of really good tidbits. Fantastic book. Cannot recommend enough. A couple of other nonfictions. Elise Gilbert's Big Magic. It had some helpful parts. I don't agree necessarily with a lot of things that Miss Gilbert says. She, if you don't know, is the writer of Eat, Pray, Love, which was like a life-changing book. And she talks about that too, about how she wrote this one book that just so many people loved and resonated with, and what it's like to write after that. So this, helpful, but I think it also taught me an important lesson, which is echoing now in my life, and that is, I don't have to agree with everything that someone says. It teaches me discernment to be able to hear something from someone who I trust the opinion of, and hear something that they say and say, maybe not that. Maybe not that. And that's something else too that's going on TikTok. I see a lot on my For You page, which is like media literacy, and how a lot of people are going to have to learn about gray thinking, so not black and white thinking, and learning to pick up on nuance. That I'm seeing a lot of discourse right now. One creator will have this idea, and it will be someone that you really like, you've really liked all of their opinions, and then they say one thing, and everyone's so, I hate saying this phrase, cancel, but everyone gets ready to cancel them and throw everything out, right? But it's like we have to be able to have conversations, and we have to be able to have discernment also, because we're not going to 100% agree with things that people say. And I think that puts such an immense pressure on everyone, but especially creators, because I know I catch myself a lot of times not wanting to speak out because God forbid you say something that's a bad take, and that's its own thing. I'm sure I'll get into that as well, but I'll keep going with my list. Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Fantastic book. And this is the book where she talks about how basically if you try to cut off one end of the emotional spectrum, which is like the bad side of your emotions, that being anger, bitterness, grief, that in turn you also end up cutting off the entire opposite end of the spectrum. Because if you can't access the really bad feelings, you can't access the really good feelings. So you end up creating this really small window where you don't ever let yourself feel too much joy, because you're not ever letting yourself feel too much pain. And there's a chapter, I wish I could remember specifically, but she talked about her grandmother's death and how that really changed things for her. And I think this book came at such an important time in my life because, as I was saying, I was grieving. and I wasn't really letting myself feel the full weight of my grief. I was using a lot of what she actually calls easy buttons, which is just ways to numb. And astrologically, I knew that it was happening. And I don't even remember the transit, which a lot of people don't know about astrology, so they probably don't care. But there was a transit that was upcoming that basically said, everything that you used for escapism is not going to work. You are no longer going to be able to escape these emotions, these feelings, these problems, issues, limiting beliefs, whatever. They are going to be held directly in front of your face, and you're going to have to look at them. And nothing that you do is going to make you able to look away or compartmentalize anymore. And I felt the full force of that. Now, keep in mind all of the programs that are running in the background, because now I've got no validation. Because, like I said, my dad, all the validation that I wanted to get from him, gone. I'm no longer achieving, so I can't get validation from anyone else. I cut off all of my friends with benefits. So I was no longer getting validation through that, through my body, through my looks, through my appearance. I started decentering men, which was life-changing. Can't recommend enough. But also, it showed me how much I depended on that validation, which gross. But I started taking away all of these, like, basically comfort items and blankets, right? Emotional blankets that had been keeping me feeling safe and comfortable. And now, not only was I forced to deal with not having those things, but all of a sudden I was allowing myself to feel things fully because I stopped using any numbing substances, any plant medicine, none of that. And I felt the full weight of my existence and every emotion that I had buried. And it was the hardest thing that I've ever experienced in my life. And I'm still feeling that right now. There are still days where it's like I'm crushed under the weight of my own emotions. And I just keep having to hope it gets better and hope that it passes. Know that it passes. I just saw an old journal entry this morning that I was like, this is absolutely what I needed to hear right now. It just kept saying that no matter what, and no matter how dark and heavy these emotions feel, they always pass, even when it feels like they're not going to. And that's what's happening right now. I was having the last several weeks have been some of the most difficult. Crippling anxiety. I have been catatonic because on top of everything else, I'm also autistic and suffer from autistic burnout. And it's something that I'm working to recognize earlier, because a lot of times by the time I notice, it is far too late. And to be classified as autistic burnout, it has to last for several months, and it has. And the last probably 2 weeks at least, every day that I have been off, I've been sleeping in way more than I ever have. I have been getting back in bed on my off days, 1 p.m., which is like, I feel like I can't even recognize myself. But, and it sometimes was like, what's the point? And then other times I would think about the things that I wanted to do, that I loved, that I had fun doing. I had just been painting and feeling so connected to that and having so much fun with that. And it was gone. Like the ability to do it was gone. And I've had doctors try to diagnose me with depression, which, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, you've heard me talk about my relationship with antidepressants. And I don't know that I'm the one to take advice from, because I know that I've got probably an unhealthy relationship with it. But I think doctors are so quick to diagnose you as depressed. This was a telehealth appointment where my doctor, who I don't even know her, she's a stranger, and I already have one of my deepest anxieties is doctor's appointments. I have always struggled with that. So I already had anxiety getting on there, and I'm kind of fidgeting, and she can tell by looking at me that I'm anxious. Of course I'm anxious. Look around. Of course I'm depressed. It's Christmas, and I'm celebrating Christmas for the first time without my father. all of our holidays look different. My mother is depressed and doesn't want to, you know, like, yeah, I'm having a hard time. And I think that going back to what I was saying about this book, about letting those feelings in, I think that it is like pathological in our culture, especially. Everyone is so grief phobic. And I think everyone so desperately wants to push away those bad feelings. But like I said, when you take away those bad feelings, you're also robbing yourself of the good feelings that come along with it. So I'm riding the wave. I know that it's going to pass. And it already is. I'm already feeling, I mean, look, I'm here. I'm doing this. I've been nonverbal for the past 2 weeks, where I was struggling to even to go to work and try to talk, to communicate. That was exhausting. And it felt like I was pushing up against the natural rhythms of my body to go and try to communicate with people and talk to people. Now, speaking of grief, I've got a couple more books in here. One, this, A Grief Observed. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't know it was going to be so Jesus heavy. I should have known, though, because it's C.S. Lewis. But I heard someone talk about it, and I read it. I don't know that I would recommend it. I gave it to my mom because they're a lot more religious than me. But I don't know that I don't know that this gave me anything that I really needed. You know, I didn't find what I was looking for. But maybe you will. And it's short. It's not an easy read, though, because some of the things, these are like his personal journals after losing his spouse. And some of the things I'm like, bro, the words you're using, what are you trying to prove? Who writes like this in a journal? He must just be way smart. He has a great vocabulary. He must be way smarter than me. Talking about life-changing books, I've made several pieces of content, whether it's TikTok. I'm sure I've talked about it on the podcast. I think I did a whole episode about it, but I don't know. I took off a lot of episodes, so I don't know. But I think I left this one up. No Bad Parts. Can't get enough of it. Fantastic. And I can't remember if I read this 2 years ago, but it's on the list. And then my favorite, talking about nonfiction, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I think it's time for me to reread this again. This is something that if you have struggled with disabilities in any way, this is absolutely something that you should read. Fantastic book. 1,000 out of 10. So those are some of the books that were on my reading list. And I'm going to give you a couple of stats of when I said I was not trying to achieve any goals and then kind of stumbled into achieving goals. Duolingo in 2024, I was one of the top 5% of learners. I was studying Spanish and also Japanese that I was coming at the tail end of the year. And then my podcast, even though I talked about taking a break from it, my videos that I posted that I was so nervous about putting videos on, even though everyone kept telling me, especially professionals who were already successful, were saying you need to be posting videos. My videos were watched 675% more in 2024 than they were in 2023. 675%. And then my Duolingo streak, 475 days. I'm 2 days away right now from 500 days of learning. 500 days in a row of practicing Spanish every day. Who says I can't be consistent? Please. And then I've got a few things as far as my artwork that I was doing when I was redoing my kitchen. I started painting again. I told you a couple of things with that, which was a blast. I got certified as a minister. I'm an ordained minister. So if you need to get married, I can marry you. It's official. I've got the certificate right here. The birthday party that I threw for my son, I made little cupcakes. I want to show you these. I hope you can see it. Oh my God, you really can't. But they're little ramen cups, and they were really cupcakes. God, I wish you could see that. But that was a blast, and that was a huge thing for me because that was my first joint birthday with my ex-husband, co-parenting at his house, where his new blended family, because also this year I dealt with the family expanding. He got married, my ex-husband, and had a baby. Now, I've got to be careful because I think she listens. She's told me she listens to the podcast, so I'll keep most of it to myself. But I will say, as someone who has struggled a lot with control issues, not being able to control who is living in the house with my son, not being able to control the fact that my son was an only child and is now not because of something that had nothing to do with me. Really, really, really difficult to handle and deal with. And as we approached the end of the year, the baby was born, and we had, like I said, the birthday party was at his house. So I'm doing it around the new wife, which was difficult for me. So I'm navigating not just co-parenting with my ex-husband, but now co-parenting with a stranger who has been brought into my life by my ex-husband. And that was difficult. Like, I want to honor how tough this year has been, because while there have been so many highs, especially considering going to Europe and getting a little bit of space away from America and realizing that this is not only is this not the only way to live, this is not even the best way to live. We have been brainwashed into thinking that this is it, that America is like the pinnacle of society, and it is not. And when I went to Ireland and I'm listening to them talk about how the police don't even have guns, it's really opened up my eyes in a lot of ways. So that was an experience on its own. But yeah, dealing with every single holiday for the first time after losing a parent, the coming to terms with the fact that he left such a big space. There's such a big void because his presence was so big, and now he's gone. And looking at his empty recliner. We just had Christmas. We're opening presents for the first time without him, because last year it was so close. We didn't do Christmas at all. We bought presents for the kids, and we didn't cook the same food because we've always had the same food every year for these holidays. It's like our traditional menu. My mom tried to go off book one year and change it, and we were like, what do you think you're doing exactly? No, get back over here. So we didn't have that this year. My mom, I had to watch her as she grieved. And once you lose one parent, this is something that you know well if you've lost a parent. Once you lose one parent, it feels like there's this immediate clock ticking on when you're going to lose your second parent, which is horrifying. And I have to keep reminding myself of the download that I got when I was anticipating losing my dad. And I've talked about that on the podcast as well and on TikTok, about how the anticipation of losing him was actually worse than actually losing him. And the download that I got was that it's not time to be sad yet. And that's when I kind of shifted away from avoiding my dad, because it was really difficult for me to see him for a lot of reasons. But I was, I think, afraid to get close to him, because I was like, what's the point of getting close to him now if I'm just going to end up losing him? Which I was. We knew I was going to. He was sick, But I heard in one of my meditations, it's not time to be sad yet. And I said, okay, I hear you. I will not be sad. I will live in the present moment. He's here now. And the amount of times that I went back to my hometown to visit them increased exponentially. I mean, it probably quadrupled. And I was really glad that I went down there in the end. And I'm saying this to my past self and to anyone who feels that way now. If this is something that you are experiencing, I did not regret spending more time with him. It does not make it harder. It actually makes it easier, weirdly. So I was really glad that I was able to spend that time with my dad. And then I had to remind myself constantly of the same thing with my mom, because I've also got a complex relationship with my mom. And I had a complex relationship with my grief in comparison to her grief, because everyone experiences grief differently. And I think that I had to let go of the idea that I had of what my grief was going to look like. I had to let go of the idea that our grief was going to look similar, our grief journeys, we handled things completely differently. She kind of wanted to throw herself into him, and a lot of the things stayed around the house, his shoes, his slippers, like house shoes were still there. A lot of his things were still around the house. And I found it hard to go and be in the house. I'm going to get emotional now, but stay with me. Because like I said, when you look at his chair, I'm looking at this big empty recliner where he has been my whole life. And now he's gone. And that was too much for me to bear, so I needed space. And how do you handle that when you have family members, one who wants to pull you in because she finds comfort in talking about him for obvious reasons, right? That is a thing that I think a lot of people don't realize. When you lose someone, they kind of try to avoid talking about them, but that's almost worse, because then it's like even the memory of him is gone. Everything just gets snatched away from you. And so I had to learn how to deal with my grief parallel to the way she and my sister were dealing with theirs. So I said I wasn't going to go too much into it, but that's been a difficult journey for me. And I've had to investigate a lot into resources about grief. And it's been a learning journey for me. And I think the most important thing that I realized is, especially with the holidays, especially with this past Christmas, I had so many people come up to me and say, and maybe with good intentions, naive, but that doesn't make me feel any better, that it happened because they were ignorant about grief. But I had a lot of people who came up to me right before Christmas. Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Are you excited about the holidays? What are y'all going to do for Christmas? And then when they were met with my response, which was lackluster, people immediately want to fix you. People are not comfortable with their own grief, let alone other people's grief. And I'll tell you what, a lot of times it's difficult for people to watch others grieve because they haven't dealt with their own grief. I have a regular who, he's probably 68 years old, and he's one of the ones who came in talking about Merry Christmas, which, let's keep in mind, I also don't celebrate Christmas because I'm not a Christian, and for so many other reasons, one of which is like hyper-consumerism. I'm kind of anti everything Christmas in general, but especially this year, because am I excited about dealing with the first Christmas without my dad? Not really. And being like almost blamed for that and guilted for that, because my regular comes in and asks me, are you excited for Christmas? I said, not really. And then he's like, oh, is someone a Scrooge? Is someone a Grinch? No, someone's grieving. And as I'm trying to tell him, like, I don't celebrate Christmas, and I'm being met with this aggressive shame, like being called a Scrooge and things like this. And now I'm in tears, and I'm like, I'm sorry that my dad died and ruined the holidays. Like, what do you want from me? And he's like, oh, that's not what I was saying. That's not what I'm saying. Come on. And now it's uncomfortable. And now, even though I'm crying and I'm the one who's upset, his feelings are now my responsibility because he feels awkward and uncomfortable. Now, I want to also point out that this man lost his mother. I don't know how old he was, but he's still at almost 70 years old, cannot talk about his mom without tears welling up in his eyes, which I understand. I obviously get that, but I just want to bring that up because that has a lot to do with why he's so uncomfortable seeing me in my grief. Because then if he sees me dealing with my grief, then that means that he has to look at his own grief and acknowledge that deep sadness, because whatever his version of that empty recliner is obviously still kind of lingering in his mind, But it's just such an insensitive thing, and people do it all the time because, like I said, this country and this culture is just not, they're so grief phobic, and they're so unwilling to deal with death in a way that is healthy and helpful. So I think kind of trying to navigate that has been difficult, and having to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations with people it has happened. And I think my advice for that is that you have to understand that people are just going to be uncomfortable, and that's not your problem. His avoidance to his grief or any of his sadness or any of his feelings that he doesn't want to deal with, because a lot of the interactions that I've had with him, I came to recognize that there's a lot of emotional bypassing. And this happened again yesterday when I went into one of my favorite metaphysical shops in town. And there's a girl who works there who it's a friend of a friend, but we're not especially close. And when I came in, she was asking me, how I'd been, and I'm hesitant to open up anyway, which seems weird because here I am opening up to strangers, right? I'm not afraid of vulnerability. I just don't necessarily like opening up to people who I'm not on that level with. And to be quite honest with you, she's a little too familiar. She's a little overly familiar with me. But as she's asking me about how I am, she's like, you look great. You look great. You look like you're 23 years old. You're glowing. And I'm like, don't feel like it. I've actually never felt worse. And I'm telling her about how I feel weighed down. And like this book, No Bad Parts, talks about describing your emotions visually. And I'm like, I feel like I am filled with concrete. Because keep in mind, again, the programs that have been running in the back is like, I'm closing all the blinds and getting back into bed at 1 p.m. And she's like, you look great, because I've lost weight. You know why? Because I'm ill. I'm ill. And it brought me back to a time when I had disordered eating, and people would come up to me and tell me when I was treating my body the absolute worst and robbing myself of any of the nutrients that I needed to function as a human. People would come up to me and be like, you look fantastic. You've never looked better. And it's rewarding, that behavior. My brain is like, oh, keep doing this. Keep doing this. And she's talking, as I'm talking about how terrible I feel, she's like, yeah, but you're so pretty. Thanks. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really care about that. Because remember, this whole time I've been, decentering men, and also kind of working with my relationship to beauty anyway, because a lot of that I realize has been kind of a distraction. And it's also something that I think people are so quick to remind you. And it's used as a tool it's kind of like a consolidation prize. Like, you're sad, but at least you're pretty. And it becomes incredibly dismissive. And the overarching theme throughout my life has been like, your value is in how you look. So don't ever lose that. So then I'm starting to decenter men. I'm starting to recognize a lot of these habits that I have come from this sort of indoctrinated patriarchy and honestly white supremacy, like having a flat stomach, that's like the utmost importance, or like appealing to the male gaze in general. And I've been shunning that, and I feel so much better in doing that. I'm learning to sit with the discomfort of not being, I don't want to say not being attractive, but that Pamela Anderson quote, I can't remember where it came from, some interview where she was talking about the pressure that she felt and how she alleviated the pressure that she felt for her whole life once she stopped trying to be the prettiest girl in the room, and how much freedom and liberation she felt after that. And once I started trying to embody that and recognize that I don't have to do a lot of these things that I was doing that were exhausting me, because we have been conditioned to believe as women that it is part of our job. Not only do you have to be smart, but you need to be pretty while doing it. If you're going to show yourself on the internet, you need to have full face of makeup. You need to be ready. And it stopped me so many times that I had something important to say on TikTok, that I was going to pick up my phone and get on here and record something. So many times I went to say something and looked at myself immediately in the mirror, was like, no, never mind. And it keeps you from doing the things that you need to do and creating the content that you need to create. So I've been working with all of that. So to be dealing with that for the last, let's say, 6 months and then go to someone for help, honestly, to reach out for help. Like that's what I was there for, right? I'm getting my little crystals and my little, herbs and things like that, the candles, and I'm looking around, and I brought my kid, and she's saying all of this stuff in front of my kid. And it's very much the energy of spiritual bypassing, because I'm telling her about all the things that I'm going through. And she's like, no, don't claim it. Don't claim that. You're bringing that upon yourself. And as someone who's already got such a responsibility, right? Like that I take so much responsibility, not just for my feelings, but for everyone else around me. And for someone with OCD who ruminates constantly on things like, if I would have worn a different shirt, things would have had a different outcome. Like it's already so pervasive in my life. And then it's dangerous. And I'm not saying that lightly, or that's not hyperbole. It's dangerous when someone like me goes and finally does reach out for help and says, hey, I'm struggling. And you say, it's because you're choosing struggling. It's because you're focusing on your struggling. No, it's not. No, it's not. I'm fully aware of the power of my awareness and how where your focus goes, that's where your energy flows. But to tell someone who is in the depths of grief or sadness or depression that it's because of them, that is the definition of spiritual bypassing. That like, if you'll just meditate more. And I'll tell you something, I held that belief for a long time. And I'm glad that I have finally overcome that belief. And that when she said it, I finally was able to be like, like I was talking about earlier, that discernment to be like, no, I don't claim this. Because the me in the past would have really internalized that. And I have from these people who work at this metaphysical shop, who I looked to as these sort of like spiritual gurus and like spiritual guides. And I look to them and they're telling me that I am the reason for my own suffering. And of course, like you have to at some point accept responsibility. Yes, 1000%. But I have done that and am doing that and do it constantly. If there's someone to blame for anything, I blame myself not just for my problems, but for the world's problems. The solipsism, if you're not familiar with it, it's just this idea that, well, I don't even want to oversimplify it, but I'll give you another one. Let's say simulation. If all of this is a simulation and my brain is the one who's creating these things, it can make you feel like when things are happening on a collective level that are bad, it's happening because of you and because your brain is broken. Because if you would just not focus on that, it wouldn't be happening. So my negative thinking is responsible for genocide. It's my negative thinking patterns and my attachment to suffering that's causing all of the issues that are happening in America right now. I don't need to be specific because look around. Throw a rock and hit an issue. And now, based on your line of thinking, that's my fault. And it's that same toxic thing that I was talking about earlier of wanting to kind of cut off that whole end of the spectrum, where the way I explained this to my son, because after we left, it was awkward in the shop. It was weird. And I was like, well, we've got food in the car. I got to go. And we left. And I didn't want my son, who was present for the whole thing, to think that this was normal. So now I'm trying to explain it to him. And I'm like, emotional bypassing is like in the movie Inside Out, when Joy didn't want to look at sadness. And she didn't want to look at anger and all those things. And do you remember what happened? He was like, yeah, that she lost it. She lost it. It didn't end well. I'm like, yeah. And that's exactly what happens when you try to cut off any painful emotions or, quote, negative emotions. That's what happens. It does not end well. So when I came to this person who claims that she was there, that's the other part, right? Is that she tells me, like, after she can tell that I am visibly uncomfortable, she's like, just if you need anything, I'm always here. I don't want you to ever think that you don't have support, or that, I don't want you to feel unseen. That's something that she said to me. I don't want you to ever feel like you don't have support or feel unseen. So I'm here for you. Well, obviously you're not, because I just came to you. I just now came to you and told you I'm not doing well. This is the worst I've ever felt, or at least in a long time. And I'm telling her all these things, and she's like, no, stop. You're bringing it on yourself. I manifested my dad dying. Like, do you see how harmful that line of thinking is? And this is just a reminder to anyone, because like I was talking about with Gilbert, I remember seeing an interview, and I can't even remember what the context was, but she said something and I was like, whoa, don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like how it makes me feel. I don't like the implications that it would have on my life. The aftermath of, if I were to take this belief and internalize it, what that would look like. And I didn't like it. And that was the first time that I was able to see, like, I don't actually have to accept this as something that I believe. I can kind of reject this. And I want you to remember that too, especially when it comes to spiritual people, because that's something that I can fall for really easily, is when you're looking to someone. It's the same way with organized religion, I remember being really, really young in the Baptist church and listening to a preacher say, you don't get to cherry pick for the Bible. You either believe the whole thing or you believe none of it. And I had to have been like 13, 14 years old, feeling that in my body, like, that doesn't feel true. But this was a religious leader telling me this, right? And I kept that line of thinking that you're not able to cherry pick. You can't pick and choose what you believe, but you absolutely can. And not only can you, you should, because like we were saying earlier, there are going to be people who have opinions that, even if you've been in alignment with them the whole time, you followed their career the whole time, and then one day they say something and you're like, I don't know about that. You should pay attention to that. If it doesn't, I don't want to say if it doesn't feel good, because there are some truths that I've had to face that didn't feel good, but they felt true, and just examining that. And that's your responsibility. I cannot do that. No one can do that for you, of looking at something and deciding if this is true and if you want to hold on to this belief or not. And that's, again, such an individual journey that's your responsibility. And there have been times when I accepted things as true, or maybe rejected something as untrue, and then later came to find out it was actually true. Or something that I was like, no, this is absolutely true. My brain is convinced that this is true. And then someone held up proof in front of me and was like, look. And I was like, oh. This belief that I've never considered as anything other than absolute truth is now not. What do I do with that? And that's the journey. That's the whole journey, is exploring what feels good and what feels true and what doesn't. And you get to choose. That's where you do get to choose what you believe and what you choose to internalize versus what you don't. And if that's what I've gotten out of this year, even if that's the only lesson that I learned for the entire year, that is enough, because it has been so incredibly helpful. Just like when my regular came in and is trying to push all of his and project all of his beliefs about what my holidays should look like or shouldn't look like, rather than taking that, I can say, this actually has nothing to do with me. This is all you. And I don't have to accept it. I don't have to take it. I don't have to take that burden on or carry that weight, because it's not my responsibility to live according to anyone else's life or structure or beliefs. None of that falls on me. And that has been the most liberating realization. So I'm sure there will be more content that I put out about my intentions for next year. But I want to say overall for this year, even not focusing on achieving a goal, I still achieved so many things. And I was able to actually enjoy the process, because once I felt how good it feels, this is the other kicker. Once I started thinking about the year coming to an end and thinking about how I was going to have to go back to focusing on the goal, I felt it in my body that I didn't like it. I felt anxious about it and sad. But I don't want to go back to living that way. And then I had the groundbreaking revelation, you don't have to. You get to choose whatever you want for your own life. That's up to you. That freedom is up to you. And that was liberating. And that's when I was like, all right. So that's when I started thinking adventure. Let's do, I could really do this. What if I really see how far I can go? What if I really allow myself to just get swept away in expansion and curiosity and adventure? And what would that look like? And again, I'm terrified. I'm still terrified. But if there's one thing I know, it's that everything that you want is on the other side of your fear. Everything. And every single time I have pushed through fear and gotten to the other side, I have been grateful that I didn't back down. And I've been grateful that I just bucket and leapt, right? Because you leap and the net appears. So I'm excited. I'm terrified, but really, really, really excited to see where that could take me. Like, what does it look like when I take the leash off of myself? I'm excited to find out. I'm excited for you guys to go on the journey with me, because of course I'm going to be documenting the whole thing. And the way that I have documented things has over the last year changed, and it will probably continue to change as we're talking about social media changing and switching from short form content to long form content. Because if we're being honest, long form content is my bread and butter. Okay. It's been an hour and 15 minutes that I've been sitting here talking, and just this, I love this format. And when I thought about, I didn't want to make TikToks because I wasn't making any money off of them, or because I wasn't getting views, validation, likes, validation, feedback, validation. When I wasn't getting that, I didn't want to do it. Whereas this, for 4 years, I sat down, and even when I was getting, 10 views per episode, I didn't fucking care. I don't care if I don't get any views. There are so many episodes when I sat down to record and never posted them, published them, and I still had a blast doing it. If this never saw air, I would still have a blast. And once I close my laptop, I'm going to feel re-energized. I can already feel it. Like, I feel so much better stepping back into the habits and the routines that make me feel good, and the creative expression. Because I also saw that you should be creating more than you're consuming, and that can cause a depression. The opposite of depression is expression. So being able to express myself, whether anyone receives it or not, it doesn't matter, because I'm satisfied with the way that I feel when I create podcasts, when I sit here and have these sort of stream of consciousness episodes, because I'm learning about myself too. And I love to go back and look. Not always. Sometimes I'm horrified by looking back, but especially with like journals and things like that, I like to go back and look and see, like, this is where I'm at. This is what I was feeling. Things really haven't changed that much. Over the last 2 years, I'm looking at my old journal entries and recognizing the way things have changed so drastically, and thinking about how far I've come, or looking at it and being like, it's so funny that I'm still struggling with this 2 years later. Maybe this is something that I struggle with until the last day that I am on earth. Maybe that's the case. And that's okay too. Learning that there's nowhere, I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have anything to do or achieve, but I am invested in myself as, for lack of a better word, a product, because I want to see, just like when I sit down to paint something, can I do this? What's it going to look like when I'm done? Am I going to be able to transmit this from the ether, from my imagination into the real world? And I'm doing that as if I am this sort of living art project. And that excites me. So if there's something that you want, a word maybe that you're curious about, or that comes to your mind, maybe you meditate on it, maybe you think about it, of just choosing one word. Or maybe you choose, like at courage, maybe you choose focusing on the process rather than the end result. And I'll tell you, the most important thing is to keep checking in with this intention throughout the year, because that was a big part of it for me too. Is a lot of times, especially with these like New Year's resolutions, it's for 1 month and then you kind of fall away with it. Think of something that you really, from beginning to end, want to explore rather than something that you want to achieve or gain. Think about something that you're curious about and see if you can focus on that energy. Now, all that being said, also, I'm going to give a little plug, which I'm not paid. I'm just going to tell you that this is one of my favorite apps. It's called the Chani app. Maybe I can put her screen grab up, but she has so many different things. And one of the things that she does, now I pay for the premium. I think it's like $12 a month. I would pay twice as much. But she does a whole reading, a 25 reading that's broken down into quarters, different sections. So the first 3 months, second 3 months, third and fourth 3 months. And she also has your 2025 themes, or for last year, 2024, when I looked at it, one of the themes that was on there was actually courage. So that was funny. But my themes this year are trust, nurture, win, and disrupt. And I love the word disrupt. Like, it does something to me. I've already been feeling that energy. So when it popped up, I was like, yeah, that makes total sense. But if you need a little guidance, if this is not something that you've ever really kind of experimented with and you are feeling overwhelmed by the idea of just choosing one word, you can download this. And I'm sure there's like a free trial, even if you did it for 30 days, but it will walk you through so many aspects of yourself. It gives you your whole birth chart and then all of these different descriptions about your placements, and using that to get to know yourself. I have a friend who's doing it now as well, because I did it and told her for years, because she wasn't really into astrology, but I told her, if you just look at it as a sort of system, like a syllabus that you can go through and look at, like, I'm going to look into this part of myself. It helps you get to know yourself. It helps you get to know why you function the way you do and how you can work to improve those functions to make them more streamlined. And so it will just give you so much insight, and it tells you individual transits of the planets. It gives you a ton of meditations, affirmations that I wake up to. The meditations, the whole time we were in Europe, not only did I force my family to meditate with me, which they loved, and I converted them, but also we would fall asleep to Chani's meditations, because she had such a soothing voice. So we were falling asleep to it. And then I guess because everyone else felt the same way, she created sleep stories. So now there are like 40 to 50 minute, there's like 6 or 7 of them, stories that you can use to fall asleep to. So that's just one little resource. All of the books that I told you about are fantastic books. There's Yoga with Adrienne, which is another crucial part of my routine, the morning routine. There you can do the 30 days of yoga. She has a literal decade of 30 days of yoga that you can do the videos of to try to integrate that into your routine to help. Meditations, 5-minute meditations. There's the profile guided meditation on YouTube. They have 5-minute meditations, a whole profile with like hundreds of them if you're just getting started. Meditation will change your life. It will quiet the voice of everything outside of you and help you connect with your intuition. So I encourage you to do that as well, even if it's just 5 minutes a day. I promise you it will change your life. Same with the morning pages. If you're journaling, like I said, sometimes I think you do need to do 3 pages. And I know it sounds like a lot, but even if you just start small with 1 page a day, as building that up, especially if you're someone who likes writing, absolutely will change your life. It'll change your writing and it will change your life, because like I said, it's going to kind of unclog a lot of those things that you may feel have been blocking you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I really, really enjoyed getting back on here. There were so many times where I wanted to get on here and record an episode, but because I didn't know how to edit, I didn't have any of the software, it held me up. But I feel a renewed sense of energy with this podcast and again with long form content, because who knows what the future of TikTok is going to be. Soon enough, we will know. But again, YouTube, you can follow me. My handle is @Bitchpedia. I'm going to have all content from TikTok. Well, maybe not all, but from here on out, if I was to post any of the content rather than putting it on TikTok, I would be putting it on YouTube. And then also, I fully plan on putting these episodes, the videos, on YouTube as well. So Spotify, if you're listening on Spotify, if all goes well, the video should be available on there. If you're listening on Apple, you can check that out on Spotify or on YouTube as well if you want video content. I'm going to try to really put out hopefully all of them with video, but if there's something that, I can't figure out, I still want to make sure that I'm getting the audio on there as well. So courage for this year too. I'm going to keep courage as my intention for this year because I know that things look really scary, but I want everyone to utilize their trust that even when things look bad, if we don't have an understanding of why things are playing out, if they don't make sense right now, I want us to hold on to the belief that eventually they will make sense and that all things happen so that we can get to a better place, not just individually, but also collectively. So feel free to reach out to me always. I'll put my Linktree links in the show notes. You can reach out to me at the Dahlia Bradshaw or thedahliabradshaw@gmail.com if you want to get in touch with me. Thank you guys so much for listening and sharing your time and energy when you could be doing literally anything else. I love you so, so much, and Happy New Year.